Comic Boom.
Hey guys, Comic Boom here to review Justice League issue 27, and man, do we hit the ground running, guys. You know what my favorite part of this whole issue is? It's the strangest thing, but it's the coolest thing. I like the little Legion of Doom bots floating around. That's the first time I've seen that. If that's been in any other issue before, I haven't seen them before, but I love the little floating little Legion of Doom bots that Lex Luthor now is apparently using to communicate. It's really good. Shoots a little hologram out there in this issue when he talks to Hawkgirl and Martian Manhunter. But hey, I'll get to that in a few minutes here. We got to talk about this issue. This issue, once again, continues to build upon the past mythology of the DC Universe as it moves toward building a richer mythology for the DC Universe. This is great stuff. Last issue ended with Martian Manhunter, of course, looking for Lex Luthor, while Hawkgirl is at the Hall of Justice trying to organize the rest of the expanding members of the Justice League to look for the Legion of Doom itself. Well, Martian Manhunter runs into none other than Lionel Luthor. And we thought Lionel Luthor was dead. And, well, we get smack dab into this issue, and what do we discover? Well, oddly enough, we discover that Lionel Luthor is in fact dead. Because it wasn't really Lionel Luthor that Martian Manhunter ran into. What we in fact discover is that this, what must have happened off-panel is essentially Martian Manhunter was incapacitated by this Lionel Luthor. And this Lionel Luthor ends up actually being a robot made by Professor Ivo. Now, Professor Ivo is an old nemesis of the Justice League. And Professor Ivo, along with his... Professor Ivo is basically someone who combines man and machine. He's responsible for building the supervillain Amazo. Or Amazo, who basically is a robot or an android that has all the powers of the Justice League. In any event, Professor Ivo basically is explaining to Martian Manhunter that he was basically recruited by Lex Luthor to basically revive Brainiac. That was, if you recall, Brainiac was essentially incapacitated early on in the pages of No Justice. At the end of that, Brainiac was essentially incapacitated by Amanda Waller, and eventually Brainiac was revived, of course, and joined the Legion of Doom. In order to reach his full potential, Lex Luthor had Brainiac worked on a little bit, apparently by Professor Ivo, who understands very well the physiologies of combining man and machines and the intricacies and the nuances involved in that. So that's what Professor Ivo did. And in return for helping him, Lex Luthor gave Professor Ivo all of his notes that he had from his father, Lionel Luthor. And all of the notes that Lionel Luthor had, Lionel Luthor's primary goal when he was alive was to try to find out the genome of the apex predator, And the apex predator is, of course, that master race, that made up the great army of Perpetua, which is a combination of human and Martian DNA. And that's what Lionel Luthor was basically working on. And so now Professor Ivo is working on it too. And as Professor Ivo tells Martian Manhunter, he goes, you know, I was foolish. You know, he brags and says, well, all the times I defeated the Justice League, which of course he didn't, but he thinks he did. That's how narcissistic he is. Of course, he's Professor Ivo. What do you expect, right? Of all the times Professor Ivo defeated the Justice League, it never occurred to him to study the DNA of the Martian Manhunter, because as he indicates, once he's actually studying Martian Manhunter on his laboratory table there, he discovers that, yeah, there is a lot of very interesting things about Martian DNA. And of course, he's familiar with Lionel Luthor's notes now and all his scientific studies, and so he's really interested in exploring and, of course, dissecting, if necessary, the Martian Manhunter. But before we can even get there, before that can even happen, there's a great entrance here by Hawkgirl, who we know at the end of last issue was looking for Martian Manhunter because she wants to have words with him about just sort of abandoning the League and looking for Lex Luthor, who, at least it's believed by most people, is dead, but we know he really isn't. Hawkgirl makes a fantastic entrance here. The art here is really good. The art is by Javier Fernandez again, along with Bruno Redondo. Really good art. I love the sequence there with Hawkgirl coming in to rescue Martian Manhunter. There's a scene where Professor Ivo is basically stating, as he's, you know, this is gonna hurt, you know, this is really gonna hurt, he's talking to Martian Manhunter, and Hawkgirl sort of breaks into the scene and basically smashes the head off the Amazo android, saying, yes, it is. And just an epic scene, really great stuff. She rescues Martian Manhunter, and she's about to have words with him when she does that, but they're attacked by other Amazo robots, or Amazo robots. Again, I'm sorry for my pronunciation, I don't know how to say it, but Amazo robots basically attack, but they're not at their full potential, because normally Amazo is a very powerful robot, a very powerful android, but clearly these are defective models, because Professor Ivo was not really focusing too much on them, because he's trying to perfect and trying to discover the genome, or the secrets of creating the apex predator that would ultimately make up the great army of Perpetua. So, but before we get to the conversation that Hawkgirl Kendra has with Martian Manhunter, we gotta switch now over to the Justice League, because last issue had the Justice League at the Hall of Heroes talking to the various heroes of the multiverse, of the various 52 Earths, basically trying to recruit them and say to them, through Superman, look, we need to find the Monitor and the Anti-Monitor, because remember the three brothers. We got the World Forger there, who is now a member of the Justice League, and that happened at the end of Justice League 25, when Superman basically came back from that dark dimension, defeated the World Forger, but basically they recruited the World Forger to try to onto their side, to try to utilize hope to defeat Doom, as Doom lies at the heart of our multiverse. And basically, they need to find the Monitor and the Anti-Monitor, at least according to the World Forger. He says, look, the only way we're going to be able to defeat Doom, which has metastasized at the heart of the multiverse, is that we need my brother, the Monitor, and the Anti-Monitor, and then we can work together to hopefully defeat Doom. Now, what they've done then to move toward that is they end up in a place called Nil. Now, I did not remember what Nil was. I had to go back and read Final Crisis. But apparently Nil was the place where all the Monitors basically resided at one point. And they actually find the Monitor in a place. They find the World Forger's brother, Marvu. They find him located in Nil. Now, the Monitor explains to the Justice League, basically, well, a history lesson that all of us who collect DC Comics are aware of, and he puts it in a slightly different perspective. And he explains to the Justice League that, look, he explains to the Justice League also through the World Forger. Both the World Forger and the Monitor sort of give the Justice League a Cole's Notes version of the three crises that have really laid at the core of the DC universe. Forget this nonsense of what Bendis has said about the 7 crises, although arguably there are more than that. The big three, of course, are the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Infinite Crisis, and the Final Crisis. And basically, the only thing you need to know, and I like James Tynion did a good job here as writer, of just basically dumbing it down and focusing on the 3 primary crises, because that's really all you need to know to understand the gist of where they're going and why they need the Monitor and the Anti-Monitor and essentially the World Forger together. The original Crisis on Infinite Earths took place in 1985-86, and that basically is what happened there, is that the Anti-Monitor wanted to destroy all the multiverse. He wanted to destroy it all. He became corrupted and wanted to destroy everything. And at the end of the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, there was a multiverse. There was an unlimited number of parallel universes with different Earths. It was called the original Crisis on Infinite Earths was called Crisis on Infinite Earths because at that time in DC history there was an infinite number of Earths. There was Earth Prime, Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 3, Earth 4, Earth 5, etc., etc., etc. And DC wanted to sort of organize their universe to sort of tighten it up a bit. And so they wiped out all the universes so there was only one. And that one universe created the universe that existed in DC comic book history from around 1986, essentially to the New 52, 2011. There was basically just one Earth, to really oversimplify it. I'm oversimplifying it, but just bear with me. So, now when there was just that one Earth, that eventually led to the Infinite Crisis. That was a Jeff Johns written story, and that essentially involved Superboy Prime and Earth 2 Superman, who were taken away at the end of the original Crisis into a parallel dimension, sort of smashing their way back into our dimension, because they felt that it had become corrupted and that the one Earth was becoming corrupted. And ultimately, at the end of the Infinite Crisis, that ultimately created that shattered the universe, and it shattered into 52 worlds. There is now 52 Earths. At the end of Infinite Crisis, there is now 52 Earths that comprised that existed in an orrery of worlds, which ultimately each of those individual worlds had their own monitor assigned to them. So the monitor itself, Marvu, actually he split into 52 different aspects of himself, and there was a monitor for each of the 52 worlds of the multiverse that existed following Infinite Crisis, and that led into Final Crisis. Now, the interesting thing about the 52 monitors that made up the various 52 Earths of the multiverse in Final Crisis was that all of these individual monitors, which again are different aspects of Marvu, because he split into 52 selves, and each of these monitors began to change shape and to change their appearance according to the worlds and the universes that they represented. And so as the narrative of each of the individual stories and lives of the different universes evolved, it shaped the appearance and changed the appearance of the individual monitors. So they became individualized in their appearance because of the different narratives, the different stories that were taking place. Grant Morrison wrote Final Crisis in kind of a very brilliant way. He basically linked, breaking the fourth wall, he linked the telling of stories to the appearance of the various monitors that made up the multiverse, so that each individual Earth had different stories to tell, different versions of Superman, different versions of the various heroes, and just like they had different versions of those different heroes and villains, so too the appearance of the various monitors that sort of protected their various Earths, their appearances changed as well. But at the end of the Final Crisis, because there was one corrupted monitor that ultimately Superman defeated, at the end of Final Crisis, Superman basically wished everyone a happy ending, and the place where all the monitors met and essentially lived, this place called Nil, I thought it was destroyed. This place was in fact destroyed. It seemed when Superman wished everyone a happy ending, at least at the end of Final Crisis as I remember, that place where the monitors lived sort of disappeared, and all the monitors disappeared, or so we thought. It appears as if what actually happened is that Marvu was born again. He was reformed again at the end of Final Crisis, probably in the sixth dimension, because remember what was said in an earlier issue, that the sixth dimension is where the World Forger, the Monitor, and the Anti-Monitor go, where they become reborn. And the sixth dimension is also where the World Forger uses his hammer to slam down and create new multiverses, so to speak. So that's essentially what happened. And it's a very interesting story, and it's also interesting that Marvu at one point, while this is being explained by the World Forger to the Justice League, Marvu looks over and sees Barry Allen, the Flash. And he says, Barry Allen, you probably remember this because you played a key role. And of course, Barry Allen did. Barry Allen, of course, sacrificed his life in the original Crisis, and he's starting to have remnants. He's starting to have some recall. He slowly begins to recall the ultimate sacrifice that he made in the original Crisis. So I like the fact that James Tynion IV here is giving a call back to that kind of history, because that's very important, because whenever there's a crisis, there's always a Flash. So it's really good. I love the fact that James Tynion had a scene there where Barry Allen sort of expresses some recollection, saying to Superman, yes, I do seem to recall that, because remember that it was Barry Allen that sacrificed his life at the end of the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, and he never came back until the beginning of Final Crisis, where he fell to Earth along with Darkseid after that war in heaven between Darkseid and Orion. And it was ultimately Barry Allen's falling back from Earth. His resurrection was never completely explained, quite frankly, by Grant Morrison. There's a lot by Grant Morrison in Final Crisis that was not explained. But in any event, there's a mythological element to it here that I think, frankly, is epic. Guys, if you're going to try to understand every nuance of original Crisis, Infinite Crisis, and Final Crisis, you're going to get a headache, believe me, because I've had more than one headache over the last 2 decades trying to figure it all out. don't bother. All you need to know is essentially what I just said, or you can read it yourself. Pick up the trade of the original Crisis, Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis. They're great reads. Final Crisis is a very confusing read, but you'll probably find something you're enjoying it as well. But in any event, so that's where we're at. Now we get to that. All this is explained. So they're in Nil. They're talking to the monitor, and Marvu says, "Look, why can't we have to save the multiverse?" And Batman says to him, "Look, we can do that. We can do that." But like the World Forger says, the World Forger refers to the source, and he says, the judges of creation that created all this. He says they created all this. He says, why would they heal a multiverse that cannot heal itself when doom metastasizes at its heart? That's ultimately the question. That's what the World Forger really fears, is that the judges of creation that basically live at the source, why would they allow the multiverse to live if doom is metastasized at its heart? How do you cure a doomed or a corrupted heart? How do you cure that? And that's really ultimately the question. But before they can, that's sort of an open question that underlies the theme of this entire series. Because where this is going now they have to find the Anti-Monitor. And Marvu, the Monitor, says that where the Monitor is, or where the Anti-Monitor is actually on Quard, which is in the antimatter universe. And Quard, QWARD, again, my pronunciation, Quard is in the antimatter universe, and it's actually the place where famously, I believe, Sinestro, created his ring and what have you. And so that's where the Justice League is likely headed next. Meanwhile, we got some interesting conversations heading between Starman and Shane. Now, Shane is the offspring of the sixth dimension version of Martian Manhunter and Hawkgirl, or the future versions of Hawkgirl and John Jones. And Shane is feeling really down because he knows that he's not really supposed to exist. He's not supposed to exist, but he's from the future. He's kind of a freak. Apparently Bobo, the detective chimp, called him an abomination. That really upset him. I thought that was a little out of character for Bobo, the detective chimp, calling Shane an abomination. I don't know about you guys, but I think if a talking chimpanzee calls you an abomination, I mean, isn't that the pot calling the kettle black? I don't know, but in any event, it was nice to see Starman give Shane a little bit of a pep talk and basically pinch Shane and said, you're still here, you exist. Why don't you come help me try to figure stuff out? So there's a nice scene there. So much is happening here. James Tynion IV does such a great job. All these moving parts that are going on here is just fantastic. Finally, we get back to the conversation between Hawkgirl and Martian Manhunter. They're there. Hawkgirl has basically rescued Martian Manhunter from the clutches of Professor Ivo and the Amazo army. And lo and behold, this floating Legion of Doom sort of drone, this Legion of Doom drone, which is my favorite. That's my favorite character. I know it's not a character, it's just a machine, but it's awesome. These floating drones. In post-edit, I'm gonna put drones all around me. That's gonna be awesome. I love those things. Anyways, so Lex Luthor appears and makes Martian Manhunter an offer. Now, we don't know what that offer is, but he says, John Jones, I know what you want. And I promise. And he seems to think that it's me. And he says, if you want me, you can have me. But obviously, there's going to be a catch to it. And what exactly that catch is going to be, we don't know. But Lex Luthor is very much alive. So now it's confirmed that Martian Manhunter and Hawkgirl believe that now they know as a fact that Lex Luthor is still alive. Obviously, he's been resurrected. We know that through the power of Perpetua. And we know that even though Professor Ivo escaped, but it's only reasonable to conclude that Professor Ivo is going to continue his research into trying to create the apex predator, that perfect army for Perpetua, which combined with the forces of Doom and all the new villains that Luthor has made offers to throughout the DC universe in this epic Year of the Villain, this is really heading toward a major event. This already feels like an epic event. I'm loving this, man. This is what DC is all about. I'm excited about it. Guys, I know I missed stuff in this issue, but please tell me what you think of Justice League issue 27. I think James Tynion IV has done a great job as a writer here. He's been criticized for being too exposition heavy, but I think he's hitting just the right amount of information combined here with the art by Javier Fernandez and Bruno Redondo. Really good stuff. Tell me what you think of Justice League 27. Hit the subscribe button. Follow me on Twitter at Metropolis40. Don't forget to check out the guys at Weird Science DC Podcast. That's Weird Science DC Podcast. The Get Fresh crew. Those guys are great. I always listen to their podcast. They review all the DC comic books every week. I think you're foolish if you don't check them out. And subscribe to their Patreon. It's great stuff. And yeah, guys. Until next time, Comic Boom out.